Hello and welcome to Sid and Terry's Doctor Who podcast. I'm Terry.
And I'm Sid. We're here every 2 weeks or so to chat about Doctor Who, old and new. We'll have reviews, discussions, and opinions, as well as the latest news. So hit those like and subscribe buttons. This is Sid and Terry, and not sedentary, but Sid and Terry. And we are on opposite ends of the big pond in Britain and America. And we're here to talk about our favorite TV series called Doctor Who. And I think we both agree that it is actually the best series ever devised because of its storytelling abilities. What more could you ask for, Terry?
Absolutely. It's been running for so long that it has so much going for it, and it still has so much potential. So this is our first episode of our new podcast, and we're going to be talking about our loves and likes and dislikes of the series. What thrills us, what turns our stomachs or not. And then for episode 2, we'll have more of a structure to it. We'll be having reviews and features. We'll be looking at Flux episode 1 next time, but this time it's just to kind of get to know what we like, and for you to get to know us, and hopefully you'll stick with us, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And another thing that we enjoy is production and screenwriting. So we both have these backgrounds, so we'll be discussing a lot of intricacies of the program from that point of view as well. When you have a 26-year-old series in the classic terms, and then you add 13 more onto that, this is quite an epic saga of a program. So it's really fantastic to have all the history and to go through the various series, the various episodes, serials, and see how they flow, structurally, both narrative and character arcs.
Yeah, now we both are aware that we have our favorite eras. I certainly do, and I know that Sid does, and we know that everybody else out there as well will have kind of eras that they like and dislike. Certainly we know there's a lot of fractures in regard to the fandom with current era. For good or bad, it has its naysayers and it has its fans. That's a good thing. We're aware as well that we don't all like the same thing, and if we did all like the same eras of Doctor Who, wouldn't that be really dull because we have nothing else to talk about and argue? That's
very, very true. And I think it's amazing to see how many people are generally more pro, at least the people that I am associated with. We always discuss the things that we love as opposed to the things that we hate.
Yeah.
There's critics out there, but I always like to focus on the positive aspects of the series. And it's just it's just one giant epic of a series.
Yeah, to me, it's one giant epic story as well. From the moment Hartnell came out the fog to the moment that Jodie Whittaker or wherever she ends up going. And I think one thing as well, I think is quite important for me is no matter what you look at, what era you're looking at, who's the director, who the producers are, every episode from 63 to 2021 is made to the best of that production crew's ability, and it may not be for everybody's tastes, but there's so much love and passion and talent that's put into these programs, whether it's the design of the costumes, the sets, the music, the scripts, the love for the show as well. And we all know that some scripts aren't as great as others, and some scripts are held in esteem where others think they're not. We for many years, The Caves of Androzani was held in great esteem as being a fantastic Davison story, let alone a fantastic story, Doctor Who story overall. But has it got its good points? Has it got its bad points? We don't know. Who are we to kind of comment really to that extent? Because I know what I like and you know what you like. But we all know at the end of the day, the love that's put into that show cannot be argued.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of parallels that you can see in both the new and the classic series. There's no doubt that Russell T and Stephen Moffat were heavily influenced by the Barry Letts and Philip Hinchcliffe eras of the series. However, they do not discount, their love for Hartnell and Troughton. And of course, I think Moffat was really more into the Fifth Doctor which of course I believe that he was on the air when you initially began. So I can understand you would have a influence.
Absolutely. So when did you start watching the series? Because bearing in mind you're in the States and it wasn't a huge show over there. So how did you find out about Doctor Who? Where did it come onto your radar?
Well, actually, PBS was where I began to catch Doctor Who. PBS is public broadcasting. It's government funded. So there were certain times, certain places that carried Doctor Who, but it wasn't a syndicated show. It wasn't a network show. So it was very limited in your ability to see it. I was in junior high, so probably 13 years old. And it was kind of funny. There was a guy that I knew, and he was walking around with a Tom Baker t-shirt. And I thought, anything this guy likes has to be absurd. Well, what little did I know, about a year later, I'm in high school, and I met a dear friend of mine, still a dear friend to this day, and he started talking about Doctor Who. He's an incredibly well-read fellow, and he just loved the series, quite into sci-fi and adventure tales. So we started getting talk about it. And I remember the first episode that I ever saw, The Power of Kroll, episode 2 or 3. I don't remember now. I think it was episode 2. And then what they would do, they would cycle through the series. At the time, we only had access to the Tom Baker episodes. And I didn't actually have PBS on my television. So I would have to go to a friend's house to watch it. They cycled back around and I saw episode 2 of Ark in Space. And from that point, I was getting into it. But in November of 1984, I had gone to visit my uncle, and in the bookstore was a Starlog Press 20th anniversary issue. And I opened it, and of course there's Hartnell, Troughton, Pertwee, Baker, Davison, and introduction of Colin in the back. And I'm like, this is a really intriguing series. So it just really caught my attention, and I recognized its viability and long-term way of surviving quickly. This is pretty impressive. At that point in time, I started getting videos from various people. And I think the first full episode I ever saw was the 5 Doctors. And the second one was the 3 Doctors, and then Legopolis. And then from about a 3-year period, people were sending me VHS tapes. And I pretty well caught up on the entire, at the time, 25-year run of the show in about 3 years.
That's pretty impressive, because I kind of started watching, I think we're roughly the same age, give or take. And I started watching the series the same time as you. But of course, being in the UK, I was watching them as they were new on BBC One. And this was an era where we'd moved away from Saturday nights. We were doing twice weekly. So it's the Peter Davison run. And I'd caught a few episodes of Tom Baker previously, but because in the UK, considered literally a behind the sofa series, my mum never allowed me to watch it, so I was never an avid viewer. Then all of a sudden, I started watching it regularly when Davis came along, and I'd seen nothing before then. I didn't really know anything about previous to Tom Baker. I'd worked out that he changed his form somehow, was now Peter Davison, or Tristram from All Creatures Great and Small, as we knew him over here. And that was it. Ironically, because I was into the show, a friend of the family lived in Buffalo, New York, and he was sending my father some NTSC Umatic tapes of other shows that my father was interested in. And he said to him, would Terry like me to tape for him some Doctor Who's? Because he knew that over here in the UK, we never, ever got repeats of Doctor Who. So he taped for me off PBS all the old Doctor Who's.
That's
so my introduction to Doctor Who was exactly the same way as you.
That is very intriguing. So you actually saw the movie form version before you saw the episodes.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Okay. And what I loved about them is that I knew obviously it was a British show, but it had that NTSC slightly washed out quality to it. Is it never the same color? I think the nickname for it, never the same color. Mm-hmm. And I loved that it looked different. Mm-hmm. And when I saw the proper PAL versions, the colors were brighter, the sound was crisper, but all of a sudden you saw the conflicting quality between outside broadcast and studio film and video. It looked really bad, but on the NTSC versions that all smoothed itself out. So I was actually quite disappointed when I saw the British versions, like, oh, this looks pretty cheap. So I was going to ask you, actually, when you were talking there, Sid, bearing in mind you live in a country where production values are pretty high when it comes to weekly syndicated television, did you look past the effects? Did you see how cheap it potentially was compared to what you were used to?
Yes, the first major effects that I remember, the visual effects in Power of Kroll, if you remember that
CSO with a line.
CSO with a line, big creature. Now, second episode I see is Ark in Space, and the guy with the bubble wrap
arm,
around his. So yes, I was very aware of, okay, well, the storyline far surpasses the production value, which I thought was hilarious. I was watching an interview with Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat, and they were talking about the Pertwee era when they were growing up. And Stephen Moffat said, make no mistake, we all knew how bad the effects were. Everyone knew. I mean, but has such a, again, it's the stories.
Yeah. And again, it was made with the love. And the BBC visual effects department didn't have huge swathes of dollars to throw at the series. They had such a minuscule budget that they adapted and used whatever they could. And I think that's the charm. I know there's lots of kind of people talk about the charm of Doctor Who and the wobbly sets and zips up the back of the monsters, but it really is kind of the case that you look beyond that because the stories are just so wonderful and sucked you in.
That's correct. Now, for modern audiences, now I have a godson, he's 16 years old, and it's not the production value of the classic series that bothers him. It's the pacing.
Yes.
So you have two different things working against it.
Yeah.
With certain audiences, So maybe that's part of the charm of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, sometimes people tend to forget or don't want to acknowledge the fact that the series is coming up to its 6th anniversary and the production values are different to what it was in the classic run. And the technical abilities have improved vastly. Now, I read a review about The Evil of the Daleks, the Blu-ray DVD that's coming up with the animated, and somebody was talking about they should stay lost because it looks like you could get them for expensive, exorbitant fees from old car boots, which is ironic when they look like they were filmed in a car boot. And I think, well, kind of, I didn't really get that criticism because TV in the 60s, certainly British television in the 60s, was very slow. The effects were minimal, yes. I wouldn't say shoddy, they were minimal. And I think, well, a modern audience can either look at television of that era and dismiss it out of hand because it's not what they want, not what they expect, not what they demand, or they can understand it as we do from a technical point of view, that actually things have developed, things have changed, things have moved on drastically from that kind of creaky set of Unearthed Child to the amazing sets of Tennant's TARDIS interior. It's just fascinating how people don't want to accept that development, that progress.
People watch things through the eyes of their present. And I remember I was in film school. I was going through it was a film history class, and of course we were watching films from the silent era on. And I remember this student. We were watching Frankenstein from 1931, and he was laughing his head off at how horrible this thing was. And I'm like, you're an absolute buffoon to be sitting there in 1994 watching a 1931 film with your present day glasses on. It's you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's Doctor Who suffers, at least classic Doctor Who suffers from that. One audience suffers from the production value, but modern day watchers of a certain age, I think,
Mm,
suffer from the pacing.
mm,
However, I think this lady I was dating had two young children, and I thought they would enjoy watching some classic Doctor Who,
mhm,
and they absolutely were glued.
mm,
Uh, it's a toss up between Pyramids of Mars and Planet of Evil. I like that,
mm.
even though I'm a
Yeah.
giant fan of the Pertwee era.
Hmm.
I think those gothic
Yes.
horror stories
Yeah. That's my
from
favorite Baker era.
Hinchcliffe and Holmes were just
Mm,
stunning.
yeah.
They were glued to it,
Yeah.
absolutely glued to it. They loved it.
It's. I think that's lovely. The kind of the kind of the generations coming up are willing to accept that series looks so different to the series now, and like you alluded to earlier about the pacing is so much slower. And yes, it sometimes it can be kind of a slow watch, literally. But I think as well, it's in the context of what you're watching. To me, that makes no difference. I mean, I can watch a Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein from 31, and enjoy it far more than Kenneth Branagh's version.
Oh, completely.
Doesn't mean to say that Kenneth Branagh's version is any less technical. It's a great film. It's well shot. It's well acted. There are some overtones that I'm not necessarily kind of agree with regard to his kind of whole idea of the creation of the monster. But to me, the original Frankenstein is fabulous. And I love it as much as I love the first Hammer version of the Frankenstein story. And I think that's kind of why I've stuck with Doctor Who, because it's what I remember as a child. It's what I enjoyed most. It was the escapism from horror of school, and then the horror of growing up and getting a job and finding girls and all those kind of things that life throws at us. But for me, Doctor Who was always there. Even though it came off the air in 1989, I started collecting the New Adventures, the Virgin New Adventures novels. I still collected Doctor Who magazine. It was still there for me. It was still that escapism for me that I just couldn't find anywhere else. And when it came back in 2005, it was unbelievable for a start. It was actually ever coming back. We had the full start in '96 with the one of Paul McGann. But it's been with me, and it's been with me for so long that I'm not as old as the series, but yeah, it's always stayed with me, and it's because I grew up loving the series and fell in love with the series that I'm willing to accept the changes that the series goes through sometimes. This is the show I loved when I was a kid. It's the show that I was watching from the 80s. It's still the same show now. The stories may be different. The producers may be different. The execution may be different. But I can still see it's the same show.
I certainly see influences. I see a heavy Barry Letts influence on Russell T Davies, and I see a heavy Philip Hinchcliffe influence on Stephen Moffat.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of look at those two eras, the first two of the new era, and Russell was very much, and has been, funny enough, since they've announced his return. Looking at the forums, if they're still called forums, the internet, kind of lots of kind of criticism that Russell was, he was the soap opera kind of showrunner. He put the soap opera into Doctor Who with Rose and Martha, and thinking, well, I didn't really pick up on that. I just saw that we saw the series through the companion's eyes. But he was there for kind of big stories, big characters. Kind of really kind of emotional punch of the series. And then Stephen Moffat came along, and his was more fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
Still had the wonderful big punchy scenes, big punchy characters, big over the top monsters, but you could see the difference. I mean, for example, the whole sequence where the TARDIS is on top of the cloud and Clara climbs up the ladder to it. That's just so wonderfully fairy tale. The prince at the top of the tower and the shark flying through the air in A Christmas Carol. All that stuff is just so wonderfully magical that you wouldn't even think it's the same show as what Russell T was doing literally the year before. But it is the same show, because that's the beauty of Doctor Who, that it could be anything it wants to be. Do you see a link, old and new, in that way?
Absolutely. I still enjoy the and it's not a nostalgia. You and I have discussed this before. I really enjoyed Russell T mining the history of the show.
Yeah.
Key point is Sarah Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just think certainly it has a broad canvas, but I think there's still opportunities to go back into the original series, and you don't have to know who the heck Leela was if you're a youngster.
Yeah.
And just pulling her out of the hat.
Yeah.
That was Louise Jameson. I've met her a couple of times, and she's just such an amazing actress. And to see possibly where these companions of old may pop up, I just think there's wonderful opportunity there.
Yeah.
That actually doesn't really answer your question, though. So, what are some other things that we'll be discussing in our next episode?
Well, by the time this podcast drops, episode 1 of Flux will have aired. So episode 2 of our podcast will have a review of that very episode. We will also have some news that may have happened between now and then in the world of Doctor Who. We will have, hopefully, some celebrity guests. We may have some quizzes. And hopefully, we might have some comments from you guys out there as to what you think we should be doing. Now, bearing in mind, this will be our second episode, and we are wanting to make this podcast for you as much as ourselves. Sid and I love talking about Doctor Who. We've been talking about Doctor Who for many, many years now together, and we've been watching it many, many years now together. And we just love the series, and we thought it was about time that we aired our thoughts about it to anybody who's willing to listen to us. Absolutely.
And I think it's, again, just the most broad palette of a series that you can do anything with. The sky, the universe is the limit as far as the storylines for this show. And why would you not like that type of formula and freedom?
Yeah.
It's just wonderful for writers and all creative.
Yeah. It's a huge sandpit to play in. Okay, so that's it from us now. So we will see you on the other side of Flux, episode 1.
I cannot believe it's this close at hand. I am so looking forward to it.
Sid and Terry's Doctor Who podcast was a Shaken Not Stirred production. Copyright 2021.